On February 12, 1999, the Baltimore Sun reported that a partially buried body found in Leakin Park earlier that week was the missing 18-year-old Woodlawn High student, Hee-min Lee. At that point, the Korean-American teenager had been missing for almost an entire month and officials had yet to assess how exactly she died, but they did suspect homicide. Hee-min was last seen alive on the 3 p.m. of January 13, 1999, when she drove her Nissan away from school to pick up her 6-year-old cousin and head to work at a local lens crafters. Her uncle, Tae-soo Kim, says we thought she would come back. Tragically, she never did. They only found her body. Signs of strangulation soon became apparent, and that, combined with the location of her body which had been left in a popular dumping ground for homicide victims, pointed to the cause of her death being murder. Hee-min's family gathered at their home on Rockridge Road upon receiving the official confirmation that she had died. She was born in Korea but emigrated with her mother and brother at the age of 12, was mourned and remembered fondly by her relatives and friends that day. Hee-min's father wasn't present, as he was against immigrating to the United States and had decided to remain in Korea. He essentially cut off all contact with the rest of his family, with no record of how he received the news. Meanwhile, Woodlawn High's principal, James Wilson, remembered Hee-min as a very warm type of person, well liked by all the students. During her time as a student at Woodlawn, she was a valued member of the lacrosse and field hockey teams as well as the manager of the wrestling team. Her job at LensCrafters, too, was no mere filler just to pass the time. She had dreams of becoming an optician someday. Authorities initially considered a possible connection between the murder of Hee-min and the body of another 18-year-old Woodlawn girl, Jodie Lambert, who had been found strangled in the wilderness a year prior. But this theory was soon dismissed when the Baltimore Police Department received an anonymous phone call claiming that Hee-min's ex-boyfriend, 17 years old, Adnan Said, was responsible for the murder of Hee-min. So how Adnan Said got charged with murder? The Baltimore police followed a promising lead. Adnan was allegedly a spurned lover with a potential motive to murder Hee-min. As such, police filed an application to subpoena at NT Wireless for call records and 13 cell site locations for Adnan's phone. This would give them the web of practical data regarding calls made, to whom, for how long, and from where, to map out his location on the day of the murder. Two of his acquaintances, Jay Wilds and Jennifer Pusateri, were also questioned. Jennifer told investigators that she had received a call from Jay on the day of Hee-min's disappearance, January 13, 1999, from Adnan's phone. Jay initially denied having anything to do with the situation, but later made a bombshell claim to police. He had helped Adnan bury Hee-min's body and get rid of her car. Some argue that the supposed confession is wildly inconsistent with previous versions of Jay's account regarding the series of events that day. When first questioned, he said he went to McDonald's that afternoon, which changed to a visit to his friend's house during the second interview. Well, let me first mention an important subject so that we can go back to the continuation of the story. Sarah Koenig, a former Baltimore Sun reporter, spent a whole year researching this case and Adnan's 2000 court, and in 2014, he released a podcast called Serial. Sought to dive deep into the potential failings of the criminal justice system and thoroughly re-examine Adnan's case. The podcast soon became a phenomenon, racked up over 40 million downloads in 2014 alone, stayed at the top of the iTunes podcast charts for weeks, won a Peabody Award. Well, let's go back to where we left the story. We were saying about the Adnan's friend Jay Wilds. Additionally, the interviews with Wilds, originally published by the Serial-inspired podcast Undisclosed, The State vs. Adnan Said, reveal numerous lengthy pauses and an odd tapping sound at several junctures of his recounting of the day's events that suggests possible coercion by investigators. It is during these taps that Jay seems to remember a key detail, correct a statement, or even apologize to those in the room. There's a tap tap, and then Jay says, "Ooh, okay," said Susan Simpson, an associate at a Washington, D.C. law firm who participated in the podcast. And suddenly a moment later, he knows the answer. Jay refused to participate in the serial podcast, but agreed to be interviewed by The Intercept in 2014. In the interview, he said that he lied to the police because he was afraid of Adnan getting him in trouble for drug dealing. Adnan was arrested on February 28, 1999, and formally charged with the first-degree murder of Jimin. Adnan's family turned to defense attorney Maria Cristina Gutierrez to represent him, and it was clear that there would be problems with her almost immediately. According to episode 10 of Serial, when jurors overheard the presiding judge call Gutierrez a liar during a verbal dispute at his bench, he declared a mistrial on December 15, 1999. Still, Adnan's family stuck with Gutierrez, relying on her strong reputation in past cases, and the second trial began in January 2000. The court records from that trial show that Adnan confirmed to police that he and Jimin had dated in 1998 and that they had kept it secret from their parents. As a Pakistani American and a Korean American, they apparently feared negative reactions from their families due to multiple religious and cultural differences. Their split in December 1998 was only complicated further when Adnan found out that Jimin had begun dating another young man, Don Kleinedienst. Solely because of hurt pride, he chose to kill, said Assistant State's Attorney Kevin Urich of Adnan. There is nothing here to excuse or explain. Some found the details about the recent breakup and the new boyfriend very suspicious. But others, like Rabia Chaudhry, the author of the New York Times best-selling book Adnan's Story and executive producer of a 4-part HBO documentary series The Case Against Adnan, side. The one whose younger brother Saad is close friends with Adnan, believed that Adnan's confession of these details was mere honesty about the facts of his romantic life to those trying to find Jimin's killer and not a careless revelation of his motive. Rabia said Adnan was just clueless. He was helping the police investigation. He had no idea that he was under suspicion. Nonetheless, the jury apparently believed the hurt pride motive. Jimin's personal diary, which was used as evidence in the case, likely played a role in the decision as well. In the diary, Jimin specifically references Adnan's possessiveness and frames him as being unable to let go of her. And on February 25, 2000, Adnan was convicted of the murder of Jimin. He was soon sentenced to life in prison plus 30 years. The proceedings took 6 weeks, but the jury's deliberation only took 2 hours. Adnan said after his sentencing, "I'll be all right. I have faith in the Lord. I know I didn't kill her. The Lord knows I didn't kill her." Adnan's attorney Charles H. Dorsey III, who replaced Gutierrez after the conviction, pleaded with Judge Wanda K. Hurd to reduce the sentence because, according to him, Jimin's murder was a crime of passion. It didn't help his case that Dorsey also conceded that Adnan made a bad decision. Still, Adnan directly addressed Hurd to reaffirm his stance. He said, "I have maintained my innocence from the beginning." The trial saw Jimin's mother, Yun Wakim, deliver a heart-wrenching testimony through an interpreter. She explained that her hardships in immigrating from Korea were necessary to provide her family with a better life, and to give her children a decent education and a decent future. She said, "I would like to forgive Adnan, but as of now, I just don't know how I could. When I die, my daughter will die with me. As long as I live, my daughter is buried in my heart." She nearly collapsed when she left the stand, and she eventually had to be escorted outside. One of Rabia's claims in her book is that Adnan's trial was flawed because of how blinded authorities were by his Muslim faith. She said they weren't able to find evidence that Adnan was a violent boyfriend or that he had a history of being abusive, so they had to plug in his religion as a substitute. They had to demonize an entire community by arguing that because Adnan is Muslim, he had the potential to do this. But in terms of actual evidence, Adnan found the grounds to get a new trial only after Sarah Koenig spoke to Asia McLean, a former classmate of Adnan's, who claimed that she saw him at the Woodlawn Library around the time of the murder. And yet, Gutierrez, Adnan's attorney, did not include her in side's defense at trial. However, when McLean later testified to this at a sworn deposition and at a hearing in the case, Adnan was granted a post-conviction hearing in February 2016 that would explore this potentially enormous blind spot in the original defense team's strategy and witness roster. Previously, Adnan had applied for an appeal in 2003, but this had failed to result in a new trial. Adnan's new attorneys argued that his original counsel, Gutierrez and Dorsey, had utterly failed to include McLean's testimony as an alibi witness, which would have placed Adnan miles away from the scene of the crime, and thereby could have affected the entire outcome of the trial. Chief Judge Patrick L. Woodward, in support of ordering a new trial for Adnan, wrote that it was logical to assume that McLean's testimony would have raised reasonable doubt in the mind of at least one juror, and needed to be heard. Even retired Judge Martin Welch, who denied Adnan's 2003 request for a new trial, ended up vacating his conviction and ordering a new trial. Welch also added that some outstanding questions about the cell phone tower evidence should have been raised by side's original defense. Adnan has always maintained his innocence. After spending more than 2 decades in prison, Adnan was released on September 19, 2022. The case became known internationally through the podcast Serial, which explored the murder and inconsistencies in side's conviction, in the process inventing a new genre of journalism and entertainment. The team behind Serial was lauded for its work, which sparked a slew of copycat podcasts, though it also raised ethical questions about whether true crime podcasts do noble work or exploit human suffering. The case against Adnan was largely based on the story of one witness, Adnan's friend Jay, who testified that he helped Adnan bury his body. Across 12 episodes, the presenter and journalist behind the podcast, Sarah Koenig, trawled through thousands of documents and talked to everyone she could find who knew Adnan and Heman at the time of Heman's death. Koenig found that there was scant forensic evidence linking Adnan to Heman's murder, and that witnesses had changed their statements to the police. Questions were also raised about the competence of Adnan's lawyer, and the veracity of the evidence provided by Jay, the prosecution's key witness. But Jay's story changed across his interviews with police, and his timeline did not match call logs and cell phone tower pings. The podcast did not come to a firm conclusion as to Adnan's innocence or guilt, but Sarah Koenig felt there was not enough evidence to have convicted him. She said in the final episode, which was released in December 2014, me, the state of Maryland, based on the information we have before us, I don't believe any of us can say what really happened to Heman. As a juror, I vote to acquit Adnan. I have to acquit. Sarah Koenig might not have come to a firm conclusion about Adnan, but the podcast brought previously unimaginable attention to his case. Serial was a huge hit, and by February 2015 had been downloaded more than 68 million times. As for Adnan, he is finally a free man. The Baltimore prosecutors dropped all charges against Adnan after the results of advanced DNA testing of the victim's shoes, skirt, pantyhose and jacket ruled out his involvement. Baltimore State Attorney Marilyn Mosby said the items that we tested had never before been tested. We used advanced DNA to determine that it was not Adnan. His lawyer, Erica Suter, said finally, Adnan is able to live as a free man, in a statement. Adnan is innocent and lost 23 years of his life serving time for a crime he did not commit. Okay guys, this is the end of the story. I will appreciate if you subscribe to the channel.